I realized a few years ago that almost all of the interventions that work to make us happier, the reason they work is they make us feel more loved by others, right? And more connected. The best thing that you could give your kids is a good marriage. If you want to feel more loved, you need to change your conversations and approach your conversations differently or have more of them, right? So how to have deeper conversations, right? So it's not just small talk. Conversations in which you really listen, where you show curiosity. We crave to be known and seen and heard.
In the world of happiness, there are writers, there are researchers, and there are legends. Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky is definitely a legend. She has been studying happiness since 1989. Before that, she was born in Moscow in the USSR, came over to the United States where she grew up. She went to Harvard undergrad, graduated summa cum laude, i.e. top 1% of the whole class. She went on to do her PhD at Stanford, where she first got interested in the topic of human wellness, human flourishing, what actually drives us to do our best, feel our best, be our best. The study of happiness had one researcher in it at the time, Professor Ed Diener, who has since passed away, making Sonja the longest running living researcher of happiness in the world today. She got into it 10 years before Martin Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi even invented the concept of positive psychology. We've talked about positive psychology a ton on this show. We're going to hear why Sonja actually does not like that term and phrase. And Sonja actually became kind of the leading researcher in this field back in 2005 for a very famous Most Cited paper about does happiness cause success? It was reversing the existing model that most of us had in our heads. She went on to write the 2007 book, The How of Happiness, and she is returning now for the first time in over a decade with an incredible new book that just came out called How to Feel Loved. She has an idea underpinning her work that she says, most of the happiness interventions she's conducted over the last kind of 20, 30 years all lead to the idea of feeling loved. So she's partnered with the University of Rochester's leading researcher on relationships, Reis, and she's putting out this new book that just came out a few weeks ago. We are going to talk about the 4 horsemen of marriages that could actually ruin a marriage. What are they? How do you avoid them? What does MDMA do to our brains? What's the best advice for dating? Why small talk doesn't build relationships? How we can make ourselves feel loved? And of course, the single best advice to feel happier today. This, Sonja's 3 most formative books, and much, much more in this quicker conversation of 3 books. Let's flip the page into chapter 158 now. Hi, Sonja.
Hi, Neil. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you again. I bumped into you, I think I want to say 2023, after you gave a riveting talk at Upper Canada College here in Toronto.
Yes.
Just so much data and slides. It was for the alumni and the events, and I caught wind of you coming from your own website, and then I snuck up to kind of come into the event and hear you speak, and I've been following your stuff forever. I love The How of Happiness. I love your brand new book. You're in the middle of like I don't want to call it a vibe shift, but you're going into new territory these days, I hear.
It's in some ways it's very new territory. In some ways it's not at all because maybe I'll just say it now. Like I've spent 28 years doing happiness interventions. So my lab pioneered sort of the testing different practices that make people happier or not. And so I realized a few years ago that almost all of the interventions that work to make us happier, the reason they work is they make us feel more loved by others, right? And more connected. So like when I write a gratitude letter to my best friend, I feel more loved by her, right? When I do an act of kindness for a colleague or a neighbor, I feel closer to them. And so that feeling loved is really the key to happiness. And so, yeah, so the book is called How to Feel Loved. So it's really about happiness. But I am very into this territory, writing it with a love scientist. I actually have a TED Talk coming out next week, and I have a slide that my daughter helped me make which says something like, I realized that to become a better happiness scientist, I had to become a love scientist. So yes, that's the new territory.
I love that.
Yeah,
This
the year.
conversation will drop on the exact minute of the full moon at the very beginning of March. So just so you know, listeners will hear this. They will know that the book is out. It'll be on in bookstores, and it'll be online, of course,
Great.
everywhere. But so you said to continue your work as a happiness scientist, you had to become a love scientist. Tell us more what that means. And I do want you to tell us about the new book. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
excited about it. I read it. I loved it. I thought the relationship seesaw was fascinating. I've been talking to my wife Leslie about it already. I've got highlights and I've got notes and scribbles. What is How to Feel Loved, and how does this relate to? You said 20. I thought 1989. I had you pegged in, in your
Oh, well,
sta
1989 is when I started doing research on happiness. 1998 is when I started doing happiness interventions, which
Okay,
are
okay.
randomized controlled trials, right? So I've been doing research on happiness for 36 years,
Yeah.
36 and a half years. Yeah. So yeah, the idea is that the key to happiness is feeling loved. So then how do we feel more love? Well, it turns out most people will report to have at least one relationship in their life that they would like to feel more loved in, right? They don't feel as loved as they'd like. By the way, we define love broadly, so it can be a romantic partner, but it could be your mom or your child or your neighbor or your colleague or your friend. Um, and we can be loved, and this is sort of one of the insights that my co-author and I had. We can be loved but not feel loved, right? So sometimes people just don't feel loved in their
Yeah.
relationships and sort of and then what do we do? And, because most people think, well, if I want to feel more loved, say by my adult child or by by my friend or by my partner, like I need to sort of make myself more lovable, right? And that's what mostly we're trying to do. We want to impress the other person that look how wonderful I am. Like I'm kind and I'm smart and I'm interesting and I'm funny. Love me, right?
Yeah.
Or we try to get the other person to love us more, and that's like difficult if not impossible, right? So, and our book really has what I would call an empowering message, which is, well, first of all, if you want to feel more loved, the first step is to make the other person feel more loved first. So we can talk about that. But it's really empowering because it's not about changing yourself. It's not about changing the other person. It's about changing the conversation.
Mm,
How do you
mhm.
approach your conversation? And when you think about a relationship as a series of conversations, right? So even when we're not talking, we're really kind of in conversation. And so the book is about 5 mindsets that you embrace before you have your next conversation with that person that you want to feel more loved by.
Yeah, you have this great model in the book. I think it's on page 77. Oh yeah, okay, right.
Mhm,
Called the relationship seesaw, and
mhm,
C is spelled SEA, not
mhm.
right, because it's
Right, I
it's
love
like
all the highlighting.
in water. Yeah, I love it. I'm a reader with a highlighter. Um, And, you show the picture of 2 hearts that are on kind
Yep.
of like a
Mm,
teeter-totter or a
yeah.
seesaw.
Mm,
Some of it's submerged. We don't
yeah.
show our full selves to the other person, but when we express interest in the other person through these kind of conversations, we
Mhm.
push the seesaw down, exposing them to us, after which
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So most of us are like kind of like underwater in a way. Like most of our self is hidden from view, right? We tend to show only kind of the positive side or the neutral side. Um, And so imagine the seesaw kind of underwater, right? That's why we call it SEA, seesaw. And then when I show, so Neil, when I'm talking to you and I show genuine curiosity in you and I say, hey, tell me, how was your morning today? And let's say you say, well, actually, it was a little bit of a rough morning. I say, well, why was it rough?
yeah,
Tell me more. But you can't fake curiosity. You have to really show real curiosity. And then you start talking and then I'm listening, I'm really listening, I'm not, like, just preparing my response to you, and so the idea is as I'm, like, kind of pushing on the seesaw and helping lift you up a little bit, right? Where you are feeling safe and trust and warm, and you have the trust in me to share more of yourself, right? And so you're kind of I'm lifting you up a little bit by listening to you, by showing curiosity, you're sharing, and then the idea is you're gonna reciprocate, yeah. Now
yeah,
reciprocity is a very powerful norm or rule of social behavior. It's very hard not to. Sometimes people don't, but most people don't do. And then the idea is that you will hopefully show curiosity in me and show interest, right? And then help me open up a little bit too, so that I'm going to share a little bit more. By the way,
yeah,
sharing, you have to do it at the good pace, right? Not too fast, not too soon, right?
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
it's an astounding idea for you to get to this through all the work you've
Mhm.
done. I mean,
Mhm.
you were famous for the 50% genetics, 40% intentional activities, 10% circumstances pie
Yeah.
chart, which I know you've
Mhm.
pulled back from a little
Yeah,
bit,
yeah.
but you've really been the leader of the positive psychology movement for
Mhm.
decades, although
Mhm.
I hear that you don't like the phrase positive
Yeah,
psychology.
I don't like the term positive psychology. Yeah, I like to call it, well-being science or gratitude science, whatever you're studying. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
that. Yeah, but it's all kind of it's all aligned. As I mentioned that the happiness interventions I did really led me to this conclusion that feeling loved, feeling connected is the key to happiness, which sounds like such a cliche, right? But when you think about it, many powerful ideas, when you distill them kind of like in a word or like several words, they sound like a cliche. Uh but it's true, right? Like, feeling love when you think about, like, problems in relationships, often people are not feeling loved enough? Have you ever seen the show Couples Therapy?
I haven't, no.
Yeah. It's an amazing show, right? These are
Okay.
real couples in New York, and the therapist is amazing, and it's like they forget the camera's there, and they're getting therapy, couples therapy, and it's so fascinating because it actually makes you feel really smart because it's so obvious what the problem is, right? They're, like, fighting, and she says, "You never do this for me," and where he says, "Oh, but you said this," and it's so obvious that, like, at the heart of it is no matter what he says or does, she doesn't feel loved no matter what she does, like, or she's not doing enough to make him feel loved. And so that was another kind of epiphany that like we had that like feeling loved is often at the root of relationship problems.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
unbelievable. I've
yeah.
really I take this message to heart. I mean, my parents are getting older. I have relied on the feeling of love from them my whole life. It's been a little harder lately, just they're getting up there and their health
Mm,
is, they need to take care of themselves a little bit more. I need to take
mm,
care of them a little bit more.
mm,
And I
mm,
sort of recognize I could see I was processing as I was reading this book, my relationship with my parents through it. And so I'm
mm,
thinking like, how do I reach out? How do I express love rather than say, how come you don't visit or how come you don't come over here? Blah, blah, blah. How do we, express interest, curiosity, what they're doing? And I thought that the 5 mindsets model is really helpful. How to feel loved. So for those listening, just out, grab a copy. Sonja's first new book in many years, I think,
13 years.
in 13 years.
Yeah.
And it builds upon, as you said, this 36-year legacy since your PhD at Stanford. But before that, of course, you went to undergrad at Harvard. You came over from Moscow at age 9.5, I believe. And you've led this really illustrious career. So, of course, as we started exchanging
Mm,
notes about doing
mm,
this conversation, I said, so, Sonja, do you have a few books that have been formative to you that have shaped your own
mm, mm,
mind, your
mm,
growth, your
mm,
development, and your work? And I know that you're a happily married mother of four,
mm,
and I
mm.
am a happily married father of four. And so I saw some other kinships and connections I want to explore.
Yeah, yeah.
And the way to do that on this show is I ask you about formative books. So I've got your 3 formative books
Mm,
here.
mm,
I'm going
mm,
to take our listeners on a little bit of a journey. I'm going to picture them on a chair between us.
mm,
I'm
mm,
going to
mm.
introduce each book as if the listener is holding it in a bookstore. And then I'm going to ask you to tell us about your relationship with it, the story
Yeah.
that kind of brought the book into your life, what it might be shaped or changed for you.
Mm.
And then I'll have a couple short jump off questions from there.
Fantastic. And by the way, I'm a big reader, so I have a ton of books that are kind
I
of
know.
informative. And so it was really hard. I know, it was really hard for me to choose. I kind of like listed many, many books, and you said, okay, let's just take the first three that I mentioned. So these are great. I also wanted to correct something. I am actually happily separated. Um,
Oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
but it gives me actually lots of other life experiences now. But we had a very, very happy marriage for 25 years, and just sort of now going in different directions. But that's life, yeah, so I'm happily separated. Mhm.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah, yeah,
clarifying.
yeah, yeah.
I did try to look up your personal situation because I was
Yeah.
piecing it together
Well,
through conversations with
I
Rich Roll and with Dan Harris. I was like, okay, I
uh,
know she's a mom of four. I got that. I got the ages of your kids roughly because in an interview with Dan Harris 5 years ago, you mentioned this, and with the Rich, you mentioned this. I was
I
like, okay, they're
I love
probably in
this
there.
private detective work you're doing there.
Just trying
My
to figure it out, but I guess I
my
got one of the key
yeah.
factors wrong in my
Well,
research.
but I do talk about dating sometimes, but yeah, I don't, like, announce it, although there's nothing there. Yeah, it's not a secret. My kids, by the way, are 12, 14, 24, and 26, so I feel like I've had so many life experiences. Actually, that's something that I like to talk about is sort of this idea that, like, I have sort of not just scientific wisdom, but kinda like life or, like, science-based life wisdom, like having been an immigrant, having had a difficult childhood, having had this really happy marriage, like being single, having 4 kids, all, having different issues, at different times. So yeah, lots of different life experiences. Anyway,
No, it's not
yeah,
it's not I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
thank you for
yeah,
opening
yeah,
that up.
yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
also in a very different,
yeah, yeah,
context also divorced.
Yeah, yeah.
I got divorced younger in my
Yeah.
life, and the marriage I'm in now with Leslie is my second marriage.
Mhm.
Um, but divorce is something I wouldn't,
Yeah.
wish upon anybody.
Mm.
It must have, um,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well,
but I
everyone's different. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Should we jump into
Um,
the formative
yeah.
books and see
Okay.
kind of
Great.
where
Great. Great.
our lives are gonna kind of collide naturally, and I'm gonna kinda let that, and to the
Yeah.
extent you wanna
Definitely.
open things up, please
Yeah.
do. We
Yeah.
can always put stuff out after, but I really
Yeah.
appreciate you being open.
And by the way, one of the mindsets that I talk about in How to Feel Loved is called the sharing mindset, which is what we're kind of doing right now. We're sort of opening up a little bit more than you normally do. Because normally we're kind of, people are like it's either small talk or kind of medium talk, or we're sort of trying to impress each other. Like, I want you to think that I'm kind and funny and interesting and smart, right? And you probably want the same thing. But like, going a little bit deeper is actually what forges that connection and that sense of feeling loved. So we're kind
Yeah.
of demonstrating this to
No,
your
I agree, and by the way, right,
listeners.
I also felt
Yeah.
internally deep
Mhm.
resonance when you said, "I have 4 kids, and I've
Yeah.
had the issues that they've all had," and right away,
Mm,
I felt seen because
mm,
I've 4
mm,
boys, they're 11, 9, 7, and 5 right now,
mm,
and, so my oldest, your youngest, kind of very close together,
mhm,
and if I think about it, I've got,
mhm.
challenges with all 4 of them that are different degrees at the same time, and I can't even imagine what the
Yeah.
teenagers will hold and the 20s will
Yeah.
hold, but
Yeah.
it's dynamic, it's ever changing, and it's challenging for sure, and there's good days and bad days, so let's get
Yeah.
into some of that here.
Great. Great.
Your first formative book is a book you read many years ago, called Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary
Mhm.
Taubes, Taubes. This
Mhm.
book was published in
Yeah.
2007 by Knopf, and it's
Mhm.
actually interestingly enough called The Diet Delusion over in the UK. Covers a clean white background with the title Good Calories, Bad Calories with a
Yeah.
piece of toast with butter in the center of it, of course,
Mm,
because
mm,
he's kind of castigating against the decrying of fats. Like he's saying fats
yeah.
are not the problem, carbs are the problem.
Yeah,
Tubbs
yeah.
is alive. He's born in 1956 from Rochester, New York, a city that you have research connection to as well. He was a physicist and an aerospace engineer before getting a master's in journalism, started joining Discover
Mhm.
magazine in
Mm,
1982, became a big reporter. This is the second Tubbs book actually added to our show. Gretchen Rubin, way
mhm.
back in chapter 5, added Why We Get Fat, his 2011 book.
Yeah, which is a follow-up, which is really the same book, kind of like in a shortened version that's more accessible, I think, to people. I don't wanna say it's the
Yeah.
same, but it's actually, yeah, I read that too. So, yeah, great.
And that changed. I mean, Gretchen said that completely changed her, and
That's
it
funny because
changed.
Gretchen she's a happiness scientist too, so it's kinda interesting that she has, also recommended him.
Yeah, very
Yeah, yeah,
interesting
yeah, yeah,
connection.
yeah, yeah,
For decades, we've been taught fat is bad for us, carbohydrates better, and the
yeah.
key to healthy weight is eating less and exercising more. Yet, despite this advice, we have seen unprecedented epidemic of obesity and diabetes. Taubes argues that the problem lies in refined carbohydrates, white flour, easily digested starches, sugars, and that the key to good health is the kind of calories we take in, not the amount. File this book under 613.283. Very interestingly, it's technology slash medicine and health slash personal health slash dietetics slash carbohydrates. Sonia, please tell us about your relationship with Good Calories, Bad Calories
Okay.
by
And
Gary
and I have to say,
Taubes.
it's been so long. I mean, I was so obsessed with this book a long time ago. But I mean, there's so many things about at the time, by the way, right now, by the way, there's like a lot of talk about the importance of sort of protein, right? And sort of kind of like paleo. So, but back then, that wasn't really the case. It was sort of all about fat is the big bad sort of culprit. And so that was eye opening. That is really sort of carbs and refined sugars that are sort of the culprit. But it's really more than that. This book is like it took so much, I would say, intellectual courage for Gary Taubes. And I actually drove to San Diego one time to hear him give a talk, to write this book because he was going against, like, so much of, like, government policy, like, all these clinical trials, and I'm not even sure if I can summarize it well. This is not my field, obviously. This is just
No,
sort of a book
no,
that
no.
but it changed how I think about food and eating. But the other thing that he said, and oh my god, like, I think that the follow-up, why is it called Why You Get Fat?
While
Something
we
like
get
that.
fat.
Why We Get Fat, is also very good at this, is that we just sort of assume, like, sort of calories in, calories out. I mean, it's so kinda obvious, right? Like, let's say to maintain my weight, I need to eat 2,500 calories a day. And so, like, if I eat more than 2,500 calories a day, like, I'll gain weight. If I eat fewer, I'd lose weight. And he actually said that's wrong. And like that was like really mind blowing to me. That it's not because the causal direction sometimes goes the opposite way. And when you think about it, like think about like when people are gaining, even when they're gaining weight, that actually most week, if you kind of like I don't do this, or maybe I used to do this like decades ago, but if you actually counted your calories, it's actually kind of incredible how close we get to balancing our calories like every day. Like it's almost like it's too good to be true. How can we, without counting, like get that close? And the idea is that the body is actually this beautiful organism. Like if you overeat a little bit, you might like actually like I don't know, walk faster. Like most kids will do this, right? They'll actually run from the restaurant to the car. It's like their body knows to work that off. And it's not thinking, oh, I need to work off another 33 calories right now, right? So there's just all these things that your body's doing without you knowing it that's actually like very wise. And so I just thought that that was like amazing because it was so mind blowing. And the fact that he challenged like all this sort of common wisdom for like decades
Yeah.
as like this lone person. And it really, as I said, it took a lot of intellectual courage that I would love to model myself about. You know, when I started doing research on happiness in 1989, like only one person, Ed Diener, was doing research on it. And he didn't even call it happiness, right? He called it subjective well-being. And that was so I was so insecure about it, right? It was so like it was considered such a fuzzy, unscientific thing to do. Now, of course, the world has changed. So anyway, so I guess I just thought of like Gary Taubes is as kind of a role model, like of intellectual courage.
Yeah, I love that
Yeah.
role model of intellectual courage. I actually, I've heard you been referred to, of course, as the longest running happiness researcher, and you're always quick to correct and say, actually, when I started, there was one other guy. His name was Ed Diener. I know he passed away just a few years ago, and I know he did kind of a lot of work around, are
Mm,
married people happier than sort of single
mhm,
people and so
mhm,
on. I wonder if you might color in the picture of Ed a
mhm,
little bit for us,
mhm,
because it sounds like he was a big mentor and role model to you. And I'm very familiar with your
mhm, mhm,
2005 kind of foundational paper that you wrote with him and I
mhm.
believe King,
Yeah,
Laura
my
King.
highest cited yeah, my highest cited paper. By the
Your
way, I
highest
just
cited paper,
yeah.
does happiness lead to success?
Exactly,
Or
besides
does
the
success
opposite
lead to
causal direction. And by the
exactly.
way, just yesterday, I was on a Zoom with sort of happiness pioneers, so like Marty Seligman was on it and lots of people. And so we actually talked about the people who weren't in the room. And so Robert Biswas Diener, who's a friend of mine, is Ed's son, who was also there to kind of talk about Ed. And so I knew Ed, like, we weren't super close. I mean, I didn't see him a lot, but like he's just such a, first of all, just a naturally happy person. His son was just saying yesterday that he's also very playful, and I can see that he's just a very playful person. Robert told the story how on an airplane once he got a fake Rolex watch, and he left it in the bathroom of the airplane just to see what would happen. Like, would someone, like, bring it, report it? Would someone steal it, just, like, for fun, because it was funny, right? I love that about him. So he's just, like, a very happy, naturally happy person. Because on this call yesterday, we were sort of talking about, like, are happiness pioneers people who are sort of naturally happy to begin with? Do they get happier because they're studying and practicing these strategies? Or some people like Marty Seligman, like, actually wasn't happy to begin with, and he is very open about that, and anyway, so yeah, so, Ed was studying mostly running, correlations between subjective well-being and, like, money, income, educational level, age, ethnicity, sort of all these important factors, right? 'Cause no one had done that before, and then my lab
This is
really
in the '80s?
yeah, this is the '80s, studying '84.
Mm,
Yeah, it was when he
mhm.
started,
And he
um,
got interested in
yeah.
happiness how? Because this is, like, the first researcher on the topic, before
Ye
positive psychology was even, quote, unquote, "invented" by
exactly.
Seligman
Well,
and Csikszentmihalyi.
for context, and by the way, my former student, Kristen Lace, and I actually wrote this, I don't know if you were aware, we wrote this paper last year, we finished it. That's like sort of this huge comprehensive paper of kind of the whole field of well-being. So if you or others are interested, it's free and online. It's on my
Yeah.
website,
What's it called?
sonjalyubomirsky.com. It's just called Well-being.
Okay.
And it's
Yeah,
250
we'll link to it.
pages. It's
Okay.
100, well, it's 150 pages with 100 pages of references. That's just how psychology papers are. But it's like if you want like a comprehensive overview of all of sort of the field. But I mean, there certainly were economists that were studying, well-being before, and there were sort of humanistic psychologists who were studying kind of what you'd call positive psychology, just not calling it that. But Ed was really the first. Like he founded the science of well-being, and I'm not. I think he was interested in happiness a long time ago, but he was kind of dissuaded from it because there were no role models, no one was studying it, and so he was studying de-individuation for years, which is like kind of the opposite of happiness. Kind of why do people become violent? When they're like de-individuated. Anyway, but '84 is when he started. Um, yeah, and I started in '89. So, but I was reading his papers, back then. So that's
Well, it's
all there
so
was.
interesting to me because I always think of it like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Aristotle said happiness is the meaning
Yeah,
and purpose of life.
yeah,
2,400 years ago, there's the famous Declaration of Independence.
yeah,
Everybody gets life, liberty, and this
yeah.
pursuit, of course, of happiness. But it
Mhm,
wasn't until what you're saying, 1984, Ed Diener, Sonja
mhm.
Lyubomirsky, 1989, that this
Yeah,
really starts to take hold in our culture as the idea that we can be happier, we should look into it, we can kind of study it. Then in arguably
yeah,
1998, but then 2000, the famous APA paper comes out.
yeah,
Seligman and Mike
yeah,
Csikszentmihalyi. You then uh, tell us on the
yeah,
original podcast, I think it was, or maybe with Dan Harris,
yeah, yeah,
about how the way that the happiness research began, because we're talking about, how to be bold in the field of research like Gary Taubes has been.
yeah,
And you actually would have these Mexican offsites
yeah.
where anybody around the world who was starting to research happiness would kind of come together and you would sort of foment a plan for studying happiness. I'm so curious about what those
Okay,
events
I'll
look
tell you what
like.
happened. Well, first of all, I want to say, so I was studying happiness for 10 years before Marty Seligman and Mike Csikszentmihalyi, decided to start this field called, that they called positive psychology. And so they had others nominate. So the first meeting was in January '99, and I was pregnant with my first child, who was born in May '99, who's now 26, right? So they basically had people in the field nominate sort of the young people in the field and some of them weren't actually studying anything to do with happiness, but Barb Fredrickson was had a new theory of positive emotion. Um, and so we all got together, started talking about it. And then that's what started the collaboration between me and Ken Sheldon and David Shkati. That's when we, developed this idea of the pie chart. And back then, that was really revolutionary, right? Because no one had really put the research together, like sort of what are the most important factors in happiness. Like now it just seems almost like trite, but like yeah. Again, back then, no one was doing
It's
this.
early
So
work,
yeah,
but it's
yeah, yeah,
foundational work.
yeah,
And the pie
yeah.
chart you're talking, so Martin Seligman, from the University of Pennsylvania, wrote the book Authentic Happiness and the book Flourish.
Mhm,
Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi wrote the book and coined that term flow.
mhm,
And you added to the study this idea that there's a genetic set point we have of
mhm,
happiness, and
mhm,
if you have two kids, you can kind of see that.
yeah,
There's a circumstances element, and then there's the intentional activities, which is kind of where this 20 plus years of research has been. Like, what
yeah,
does journaling do? What do conscious acts of kindness do? Which your study on that has been
yeah.
one I've quoted for years. And then, but have you? Are you distancing? Have you distanced yourself from that pie chart, or is that still something that you believe?
Yeah. By the way, I have a paper with Ken Sheldon, which is called Revisiting the Pie Chart, which you can easily find, where we basically just sort of explain what our thinking is on the pie chart. So we distance ourselves from the numbers, and we never really believed that
Yeah.
in those numbers, like this 40% or
Mhm.
is under your control, that people just kept misinterpreting it. And so
Mhm.
so now what I say is like, just think about what are the determinants of happiness. There are really three buckets, right? And the first bucket is genetics. Like we all know their genetic influence on happiness. There's not a specific candidate gene. There's probably thousands of genes, but we know those are important. The second bucket of influences on happiness has to do with our life circumstances, right? Are we rich or poor? Are we married? Where do we live? How old are we? Etc. And of course, and the extent to which those are going to be impactful are going to depend on like how good our circumstances are, right? So if we're pretty comfortable, they're not going to matter that much to our happiness. But if we're in an abusive relationship, if we live in a war zone, right? If we live in poverty, absolutely, like that's going to be a huge factor of our happiness. And then the third bucket of influences on happiness are like what actually we can do every day, like to affect it, right? Or how we think and how we behave, how we act. And so I've devoted my career, to really studying that third bucket.
Mhm.
It's like, what is it that we can do? So that's why my lab. So in '98, my lab pioneered what we call happiness interventions, right? Which are
Hmm.
like they're like clinical trials, but instead of testing a medication or a vaccine, we're testing a happiness practice. We're randomly assigning people to like express gratitude or do something else, etc.
And because
Yeah,
you mentioned in circumstances, the first thing you said was, I'm a
yeah.
richer, I'm a poor. I wondered if is the paper you most described to the Kahneman paper from 2010, Woodrow Wilson, where he says that above a certain mean, I think at the time it was 70 something
Mhm.
$1,000. There's a marginal benefit to wealth that I think people put in today's numbers like 110 or 120,000. I'm curious for your talk just on wealth today as it relates to
Sure, sure. I
happiness.
actually, I teach this class every Friday on Zoom that anyone can sign up for. And we actually just had a class on sort of happiness and money to kind of summarize. It's just a half-hour class, and it's to sort of summarize it. And it's a little bit nuanced, right? But one of the sort of the summaries of all there's tons of research. You mentioned this one paper. There's hundreds and hundreds of papers on money and happiness, both from the economics field of economics and sociology, but also psychology. But one of the take home points is, yes, that like money really makes you happy if it keeps you from being poor, right? If it buffers you from all those difficult challenges, when you don't have much money. So when you have little money, it like makes a huge difference. When you already are comfortable, and that line can be in very many places depending on where you live, right? And who you are. So that's why I don't like to put a number on it. Then money is still going to make you happier, but just sort of not as much. It's going to kind of flatten out a little bit, not as much as you think, right? But incredibly, like, if you make 300,000 a year, compare that to someone who makes say 500 or a million a year, there's still going to be a gradient, right? People are still happier. So that's one finding, but there's lots of other findings. It turns
So,
out that money makes you, yeah,
yeah, you would agree with
yeah.
the sense that money does make you happier.
It does, absolutely. It does make you happier,
Mhm,
but it also depends on how you spend it, right? So it turns out if you spend money on connection, on
mhm.
contribution, helping others, on personal growth, learning, it's gonna make you happier than if you spend your money on just, like, buying more stuff.
So you agree money then on
Mhm.
the third point, intentional activities, which you've been studying for decades, and I've read your foundational work on acts of kindness. Like,
Mhm.
I thought that's what you said was the biggest
Mhm.
thing that creates happiness. Are you in today in
Well,
2026,
okay.
do you
Right, right, right. So, yeah, so we've done so we mostly focus on, kindness interventions and gratitude interventions. We have definitely said acts of kindness interventions are very powerful, right? Because 'Cause they're very concrete, like you help someone else. And then I had this sort of this epiphany that the key to all these interventions is they make us feel more connected and loved. And so then we started thinking, well, maybe we should just ask people to socialize more. Okay, so we did this big study where we asked people just to act more extroverted for a week, or to act more introverted for a week. And the people who acted extroverted got a lot happier, including introverts. And so then we started doing more studies on just having more social interactions. And now we're studying conversations, right? So now, if I were to give you kind of my number one happiness tip, and this is very relevant to the new book, How to Feel
Exactly,
Loved. Yeah,
exactly.
because the book is really about relationships are a series of conversations, and sort of if you want to feel more loved, you need to change your conversations and approach your conversations differently, or have more of them, right? So how to have deeper conversations, right? So it's not just small talk, conversations in which you really listen, where you show curiosity, where you help the other person to share. Anyway, so that's what we're studying now. So I actually think now the most powerful happiness booster is sort of anything social, really, like anything that helps you connect,
Yeah,
But yeah,
the most powerful happiness booster is anything social.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
a
mean,
huge statement coming from you.
no,
I
it is,
like
and
it.
so I have this, this TED Talk that would have come out on February 3rd. So basically, just a 5-minute talk, but I worked very hard on it,
Of
like
course.
those 5 minutes.
As Mark Twain
Um,
says, it's hard to make something short.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is that famous line, right, by Mark Twain, right? I would have written it. Sorry, I wrote you such a long letter. If I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. But anyway, but I say in that talk, if I were to give you sort of I don't know, like one tip to be happier today, it would be go out and have a 15-minute conversation with someone.
Mm.
And research shows that just like people on average are so much happier after a conversation than before. And so as a podcaster, I mean, and maybe it's different when you're sort of doing it for work, but like, yeah, like you know the power of conversations.
And I also
And
know the pain or the sadness or the loneliness I feel like even in
yeah,
my kids go to school, my wife's off to work, I'm sitting at home, I'm preparing for this podcast. I have the morning and I'm like, immediately I feel like lower. You know what I mean? Like the house is quiet. I hear the hum of the fridge. I'm like, I don't know if it's just me, but I do require like a pretty high
Yeah,
amount
so
of
you're an
social.
extrovert. Right, right, you're an
Yeah.
extrovert. Right, right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I call myself let's see, an extroverted introvert, 'cause I
Ambivert.
still I love solitude. I really love solitude, but I'm also very social. I love my happy place is parties. I love going to parties. Partly because you can go from one conversation to another, like, you're not stuck in one conversation.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway,
I even heard you
yeah,
say
yeah.
that you take Uber Pool specifically for conversations with strangers.
Oh, interesting. I maybe by the way, I don't think that exists anymore, but when it
It
existed.
does here in
Oh,
Toronto.
it
I could do
does?
it.
Oh, we don't
You
have it.
always like if it's a $17 ride, I can go down to $13. I'm willing to
Yeah.
take 5 minutes longer and go with three other
Right,
people.
right, that's funny. Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, I've had some really great it does not exist where yeah, they used to have it, and I don't know, not anymore, but yeah, that well, again, I'm not as good talking to strangers, although when I do talk to Nick Epley at University of Chicago has done all this research, and he has a new book out, or soon coming out, called Under Social, that like we're not social enough, that like, and he's a big proponent of talking to strangers, has done all these studies showing that just talking to your person sitting next to you on a train, talking to your bus driver, talking to your
Yeah.
barista is going to make you happier. And I do that sometimes. I'm not as good at, like, I'm not really a chit chatter. But certainly talking to people I know, like, I feel much happier. Of course, on average. I mean, sometimes we have a horrible conversation with someone, right? Um,
Yeah.
but on average, we're happier
And you
after than
said the
before.
number thing one thing you could do if you wanna be happier is do anything social, but I was just gonna ask you just for
Mhm.
clarification because you mentioned Nick Epley's work at University of Chicago and
Yeah.
so on. You mentioned talking to people on trains. This is in real life. This is IRL. Like, when you say anything social, does that not include social media then?
Well, that's a whole other conversation, but, I do think we actually have one study where we compared all kinds of different social interactions and how in sync people felt and how much warmth they felt, how connected they felt, um, and we actually didn't find a difference between face-to-face, video, and phone. So anything involving voice
Mm.
was connecting, and so but I'm
Mhm.
not saying that it's the same because I do think there's something about, in real life, breathing the same air as someone that's, like, really special, physical touch, smell, all of those things that happen in real life, but, at least in some studies that show that you certainly can benefit greatly from a phone call or from a video call, I still think that face-to-face is better, um, but, yeah, I don't wanna, throw shade onto some of these
No.
other forms of connection that actually
No.
do help people connect.
I was just talking
Yeah.
to somebody the other day about how, like, the voice memo kind of thing that just sort of crept up on us, like, it came
Yeah.
into iOS. You can and, my wife thinks of her voice memos with her friends as, like,
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
great joy in her life. I've started using them too. I advocate for people that they spend 2 minutes a day sending one voice note to somebody they would invite
Mhm.
to their wedding,
Mhm.
using Dunbar's number,
Yeah,
150.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Who would you invite to your wedding? And just state the value of the relationship,
Mhm.
share something going on with you, and like, ask them a question.
Mhm.
And, I feel like people respond well to that, if you keep it 2 minutes. Like, if you get a 12-minute voice note, it's hard to respond, but I like
Mhm.
your point about voice. Now we're talking about
Yeah.
research, deep research, interesting research, counterintuitive research, and in real life lab research. Maybe nobody other than you has done that better than Mr. John Gottman. John Gottman, for those that don't know, has been studying relationships for in this lab where he like gets people into like rooms and actually
Mhm. Mhm.
records them, and he kind of comes out and he put out this book in 1999 called The Seven Principles of
Mhm.
for Making Marriage Work,
Mhm.
published by Harmony Books. I'm holding a revised edition I just bought a few weeks ago, already in its 36th printing, and this is 2015, so it's like this thing's flying. It says over 1 million copies sold in the cover. It's a white cover, pretty serify font with a little bit of lime green trim. The O in the word work at the bottom is like this set of couples rings, like two gold rings. I took my ring off, by the way, and put it on the book cover. It's the exact size of my ring, and then the other ring is like tiny.
Hilarious.
It's like, I guess a big person married to a small person kind of thing. Beneath the rings, it says a practical guide from the country's foremost relationship expert.
Mm.
And in the bottom, it says John M. Gottman, PhD, in a big 24-point Arial font. And below that, in a very small 12-point font, poor Nan Silver gets kind of tossed in. That would be the
Yeah.
journalist that wrote the book with him. What is
Yeah.
this about? This guy, by the way, is 83 years old now. founder and director of Gottman Institute. He's published over 250 academic articles, over 50 books since he began, quote unquote, systematically observing couples in a lab in 1970 when he was 27. He uses rigorous scientific procedure to observe the habits of married couples in unprecedented detail, and this is the culmination of his life work. 7 principles that guide couples on the path towards harmonious and long-lasting
Yeah.
relationships. Dewey
Yeah.
Decimal Heads can follow this one under 306.1 for social sciences / anthropology / cultural institutions / marriage. Sonia, please tell us about your relationship with the 7 principles for making marriage work by John Gottman.
So I have given out this book to couples who are getting engaged. But I think anyone who has ever been in a relationship, romantic relationship, or wants to be in a romantic relationship should read this book. And it is based on research, but like it's very wise. It just has really, really wise advice, and some of it like it's kind of like what I don't know, like the famous advice is that successful relationships are not just about like conflict. So like, people think like, oh, if we fight, that's bad. If we don't fight, that's good. But it's not necessarily, that's not really the key. It's not necessarily even about communication, but it's about sort of like these very everyday moments, when someone's making a bid for attention, you respond to that. It's about sort of this like moments of responsiveness, which again, my new book, How to Feel Loved, is really about that too. It's about these conversations that you're having, whether this is about romantic relationships, but we're talking about all kinds of relationships. Like,
Yeah.
how do you respond? You listen, you show curiosity, you share.
Yeah.
But really even more but what really the memorable part that I took away is like he Gottman talks about these four horsemen of the apocalypse, which are sort of these
Mhm.
4 things that if you find yourself doing this in your relationship, that is not good, right? And they are contempt, criticism, stonewalling, and defensiveness.
Yes.
And that contempt is the worst one. If you find yourself showing contempt, that is like the biggest predictor of like relationship, breakup. And I remember, I mean, it's like
What's an
amazing.
example of
Yeah.
that?
Well, one example is when you find yourself rolling your eyes at
Mm.
someone, not necessarily that even they see it, because you're just like, you know what I mean? Like just find yourself a moment. We probably have all done it where you just kind of roll your eyes and it's one thing to roll your eyes at like the TV screen, but to roll your eyes at this romantic, someone you love. And I actually that happened to me once in a romantic relationship where I found myself rolling my eyes at. I remember thinking, "Oh my God, like this is the end." Now, of course, you can save the relationship and you can work on it, and but I just remember that lesson was like a really important lesson. If you find yourself again criticizing a lot, being defensive, like what does that mean? Like, think about what that means. And it's really relevant to my new book because in the new book, it's really more of a positive approach. It's like it's about listening, curiosity, accepting someone for their flaws, showing warmth, sharing. And if you find yourself not doing those things, like that's a diagnostic too. We've actually found some of the early readers of our book have like broken up with with their partners after reading our book because they're like, oh my God, I realized like because they're using it as a diagnostic. They're like, I realized that my girlfriend just isn't showing any curiosity in me. So it's a little bit like Gottman, but Gottman's are more like the negative behaviors and ours are like lack of positives. Like, what if
Yeah.
she's not showing curiosity in you? What if you're not sharing and she's not sharing or he's not listening? Doesn't mean it's not fixable, by the way. Absolutely, we can work
Yeah.
on those things. But it's a diagnostic. We actually have a quiz we created that people can take to sort of take this diagnostic to sort of see where you are in a
Yeah, I love
particular
that
relationship.
quiz. It's
Yeah,
at
yeah, yeah,
howtofeelloved.com. That's one
yeah,
great thing about the
yeah,
Gottman book too, is it's just
yeah.
really laden with quizzes. So even, first principle is enhance your love maps. And I was like, what does that even mean? But of course, when you open the chapter, it's like you and your partner each fill out this survey. And it's like, name 2 of my best friends, name 2 of my favorite movies, name
Mhm.
2. And you're sort of like, oh, well, if you score, more than 10 out of 20, you know your partner pretty well. If you score less, it's time to invest in getting to know them better, right?
Right, you're
Number
not
2,
listening, showing curiosity, right?
showing curiosity. Number 2,
Yep.
nurture your fondness and admiration. Number 3,
Yeah.
turn toward each other instead of away.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about these principles in the context of children and
Mhm.
having, because I have 4 kids and
Mhm.
it's pretty rare now, and
Mhm.
I hope it's not rare for the future because it
Mhm.
looks like our global population is about to decline for the first time in a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I wondered how you thought about these principles of relationships, both in your 25-year marriage, but also as you're dating now,
Yeah.
in the context of having kids? Like,
Right. So you're talking Gottman's principles or
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Um, well, I mean, absolutely. Like they're very relevant. I mean, again, he talks about romantic relationships, but yeah, if you find yourself rolling your eyes at something your kid says, or well, they will roll when they're teenagers. They will roll their
yeah.
eyes at you. So actually might be an exception where like that's just like a teen thing to do, and that doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship is doomed. Um, but
But I
like,
was also thinking of
yeah,
it like
yeah.
more like how do you have time to take care and nurture and practice the relationship with your primary
Mhm.
partner when you have the demands of
Oh,
children
I see.
around
Yeah,
you,
I know.
you know?
And you're asking for a friend.
Yeah, no, I'm
Uh,
asking very
no,
much so for
yeah.
for me.
No, it's and by the way, I'm kind of in awe that you have 4 kids because I have 4 kids, but they're like 12, 14 years apart, like 2 and 2, so, which is a completely different
You think
situation, right?
mine's harder, I think yours is harder.
Yeah. No, mine is so much easier, right? Because the older ones, they were like the babysitters for our younger ones. You know, they were 12 and 14. Um, and then, anyway, so it's really hard. It's really, 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 really hard. Maintaining passion is really, really hard. And again, I'm getting back to sort of what we talk about in our book, sort of the sharing and listening curiosity, like having the capacity, the bandwidth,
Mhm.
and my actually Carrie Reis, my co-author, talks about how often couples will save that connection time for like the worst time of the day, right? They come home from work, they're
Yeah,
tired, blah,
yeah.
blah. They're making dinner, they're helping their kids with homework or whatever. Finally, it's like 10:30 p.m. And now the kids are in bed, you're sitting and you've done your email or whatever, and you're sitting together and like that's your time together. And he's like, that's not good, that's like not leaving time. That's not prioritizing your marriage. And I always say it. I'm not the only one who says that. Like the best thing that you could give your kids is a good marriage, right?
Mm,
Is a
mm,
happy marriage, right?
mhm.
Because they're going to benefit from that. Um, and anyway, so it's incredibly hard. But remember, like the sharing, listening, curiosity. How can you do that? When can you find time to do it? Maybe it's having a date night. Maybe it's like
Yeah,
you call on the phone in the middle of the day and you're like, when you have the capacity, when you have the energy to be
yeah,
like, tell
yeah.
me, because we all want to be seen and heard. And when you say, how was your day? And she says, fine or okay, like, how much capacity do you have to actually listen to the details of like, oh, that colleague said this thing that upset her, or, this, or she, her, whatever, couldn't find a parking spot. Often it's like the details of the day that we really want the other person to like care and hear about and we often don't have that capacity, so sort of
No,
finding
I
that
I
time.
think that's
Yeah,
such a
yeah,
profound
yeah,
point though, which is like
yeah.
and you make the point about not doing it when it's like the worst possible time. Like Leslie and I have a phrase that we sometimes use, which is
Mhm,
"I'm dead to the world."
mhm,
And so if we get up to our bedroom and it's
mhm,
like the end of the night, we've put the kids to bed and like, one person instinctively
mhm,
wants to say, "Hey, what about that thing with my mom?"
mhm,
Or what about that thing? We just say, "I'm dead to the world." And it just
uh,
basically means you cannot ask me about anything
yeah,
outside of this room.
yeah,
And we do have a weekly date night. That is
yeah,
something that when we miss it for 2 or 3
yeah,
weeks, we notice it, like, there more
yeah,
friction does start to bubble up. So the date night's important, and then one game that we tried to use on our date night, not always
yeah.
perfect, but we try to bring it up, is this game called CQD. My wife Leslie invented it. CQD
Oh,
stands for compliment, question, dream. So each
uh,
person is forced to, come up with a compliment for each other, then a question, which you then both answer, and then a dream or a vision.
yeah,
And usually on a date that just like sparks us into a
yeah.
conversation about one of the topics, but just a couple things that we have been trying.
I love it. I love it, I love it. By the way, I love it, by the way, there's research on compliments and how important they are and how people don't give each other enough compliments. I love that. And then the questions, like, we don't ask each other enough questions. Again, back to Nick Epley at Chicago, he has these studies that show that people think that asking deep questions will be uncomfortable, that the other person I mean, it's a little bit easier with a romantic partner, but just think of everyone in your life. The other person will, like, think we're prying or being nosy, but actually, on average, like, we want to be asked, like, we crave to be known and seen and heard. So, yeah, so ask real questions of each other, not just, "How are you?" So,
We crave to
yeah,
be known, ask real questions. That's
yeah,
great.
great.
I
Okay.
want to, before we jump off this book into your third and
Yeah,
final book,
yeah, yeah,
I want to ask you about MDMA because
yeah.
um, you've been on the record as saying, both on Rich Roll, and you put out a
Mm,
paper
mm.
saying that you think MDMA could be a valuable research tool
Yeah,
for understanding psychological neurobiological mechanisms. I've never tried it. I'm very curious about it. I've been told by a few friends,
yeah.
"Hey, have you and Leslie ever
Mm,
tried a small dose of MDMA?"
then
My friend Mel Robbins has been public about using MDMA in her relationship and for her, kind of family therapy, couples
yeah.
therapy. it seems like we're on the precipice here,
Mhm.
and you've been open about your experimentation with it, and I'm very curious about it. So I guess I'm just trying to ask you, like, what questions should somebody ask before they
Yeah.
enter into MDMA use for relationship purposes, for to increase connection? What have you seen from any early research, and can you kind of tell us where the science
Yeah.
is today?
Yeah, I am a huge proponent. Actually, it's funny. I hate to say like proponent because I want to be sort of an unbiased scientist, and yet there's both tons of clinical anecdotal evidence. Therapists have been using MDMA for decades, right? With couples kind of underground. Um, One of my neighbors mentioned that he wrote his divorce settlement on MDMA with his ex-wife, like, which I thought was, like, a brilliant idea because it makes you basically what happens when you're on MDMA is that it lowers the walls. It makes you less defensive, more loving, more grateful. You see beauty in the other person. And so really and so people you can actually talk about hard things. Actually, one thing that's good for a relationship is, like, if you wanna talk about something hard, let's say you get a job offer in another city and you wanna talk about that because that maybe the other person really doesn't wanna move, right? That's a really hard problem in a relationship. And then under MDMA, under the influence of MDMA, like, you can talk about these hard topics without defensiveness, which is being like, "Oh,
Hmm.
so that's how you
Kind of
feel."
lowers the fear receptors, as I understand it,
Exactly, and
right?
that's why
Yeah.
it's used for people who've had trauma, like, imagine, like, if you've been in combat, like, women who've been raped on under MDMA, they can go back into that room and they can process that experience because otherwise they can't, right? Because it's so awful and they're so afraid, and, therapists will say, like, you can't totally get over something without kind of processing, integrating it, so you have to kinda go back into that room, is my understanding, and so MDMA helps you resolve trauma, address trauma. But even without trauma, it sort of helps you just have like really honest, loving conversations. And also, just like, even if there's nothing difficult to talk about, it just builds love and like warmth and, yeah, towards each
And
other.
MDMA
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
same in your mind as Molly or ecstasy,
Yeah,
correct?
it's the same. So
S
MDMA is just the chemical term, 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine. Um, into Molly and ecstasy sometimes will have like other things in them, but yeah, they're the same. They're the
and
same
any
thing. Yeah.
suggested, because right now, of course, it's illegal for most of the world, right? And we're talking
Yeah.
about you're at the cutting edge of science, you're at the cutting
Mhm,
edge of research, you're speaking to researchers, you're putting up papers.
mm,
So we have both that emerging world
mhm.
together with the fact that, it's gray market, it's black market.
Yeah.
And people like me, my fear is like, how do I know this is
Mhm.
good quality? Where am I getting it from? How much do I take? What's the guide? Like, we're missing that whole architecture,
Exactly.
which for someone like me, like a cautious left brain person, like I
Yeah.
kind of feel like I need that, but I also don't want to wait till it's potentially never legalized for my whole life.
Exactly. I mean, there are places where it's decriminalized. It's really never no place that's legal, and that's always a problem, right? Like, we use research grade MDMA, for our studies that we obviously can't can't touch, only for research. Um, my I guess my biggest, advice there is, there's a batch that people have, they make it in a lab. There's batches of MDMA that maybe you have friends or clinicians that have relied on the same batch, and there's been no, dangerous sort of effects. But there's always a danger, right? There's always danger with something that's illegal, that it's not regulated, it's not, yeah, you don't know what's in it. You can also
Okay.
use, like, things like fentanyl strips to test for. There's all kinds of testing kits one can use to make sure there's nothing in there, that's
Hmm.
harmful to you. Yeah.
Okay, so you're
Yeah.
pushing the science forward a little bit. You're coming out as an
Mhm.
active proponent, which
Mhm.
sounds like makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense based on your background there. And
Mhm.
we are
Mhm.
all kind of eagerly watching the space
Mhm.
as things move ahead. Thank you so much for your openness there. I really appreciate it, and I want to be part of the movement to sort of understanding, right? Like we're all trying
Yeah.
to figure this out.
Mhm.
So people like you, people like Tim Ferriss, people like Rich Roll that are coming
Yeah.
publicly and saying Rich Roll just talked about how he went to Mexico and did like a a psilocybin experience. He's
Mhm.
been really
Mhm.
public and open about that.
Yeah.
Kind of a surprise, for a guy that's been
Mhm.
very sober for very long, but
Mhm.
not seeing those as challenging each other, but more just looking
Right.
to the human condition.
Right, right.
Now, research, science, nonfiction, scratching that left brain,
Mhm.
this all
Mhm.
goes together with your third and final book, which is Come
Mhm.
As You Are by
Mhm.
Emily Nagoski. Emily, of course, was our guest on chapter 146 of this podcast. We love her. She's born in 1977. She became a peer health educator at the University of Delaware during undergrad, which then began this 30 plus year career in sex education, including being director of wellness at Smith College. This book, Come As You Are, is like it's a phenomenal cover, right? It's a giant bright pink cover which has a double-ended zipper that
Yeah.
opens up into like a red reveal below. To be blunt, it looks like a labia and a
Yeah.
vagina. Come As You Are is in 4 words down the middle with the subtitle in between, the
Mm,
surprising new science that will
yep.
transform your sex life. So, uh, by the way, Emily, I don't know if you knew this, is also a trained Gottman 7 Principles educator. As a side note, Dewey Decimal Heads, you can follow this. This somewhat reveals Melville Dewey's 1873
Mm,
prudishness, but
mhm.
it's 613.9 for technology slash medicine slash birth control, reproductive, sex hygiene, and sexual techniques.
Mm.
So, yeah, tell us about your relationship with Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski.
Oh, such an amazing book. I also give it to friends, basically anyone who has sex with women. So, like, if you're a man or a woman who has sex with women, or if you're a woman and you want to understand your sexuality better, I thought I knew a lot about female sexuality. In this book, it's just so also really accessible, and
Mhm.
this idea, I guess, that at the heart of the book is
Blogger
this idea.
style.
What? So,
It's like she's writing it like blogger style, like it's
yeah, I mean, it's just so easy to read. Yeah, so accessible. I actually gave it to a friend whose son is 17 and is starting to have sex with his girlfriend, and I'm like, he should read this book. Like, and we don't know if he's actually going to read it, but as a 17-year-old. But anyway, it's, at the heart of the book is sort of this dual control sort of action model of sexuality, this idea that there's sort of accelerators and there are brakes, like what turns you on is sort of the accelerator, and sometimes maybe your accelerator, you're maybe hard to turn on, and then the brakes are like some people, it's like very easy to kind of turn off or not turn on, right? Because there's lots of brakes. The brakes could be like stress or body image issues or things like that. And so that was like so simple and almost kind of obvious, but like really helped me understand sexuality. And then the other thing that like was really kind of game changing for me and my friends, because we talk about this book a lot, is this idea that context matters, right? And so
Mm,
I'll just
mhm.
say it in a really simple way. That often, like my friends and I will talk about, like, wanting to have sex with a guy and we're just sort of not turned on. And we kind of blame the guy. So we're just talking about straight people and not blame like he's a bad person, but we're just like, "Oh, I guess we're just sort of not attracted to him enough," you know? And what Nagoski shows is that actually context really matters and that the woman, well, both people can really set up like a context, like an environment where things are just gonna go better, right? That are where there's like the accelerator and there's fewer breaks. And so it's like we're in part responsible for our own, like, you know, uh arousal sort of or being sort of turned on, that it's
Yeah.
not just like, oh, if the guy's not, like, whatever, if I'm not attracted enough to him. So that was actually really seemed almost obvious, but that was like really a big epiphany, I think, for my friends and I.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
This
yeah,
book
yeah.
has been on my shelf for years. I,
Mhm,
interviewed Emily,
mhm,
thought it was a great book. I love her knack for chapter titles, like,
mhm.
she kinda demystifies it. She has this chapter called "When Someone Yucks Your Yum," which I always I thought was one of the best chapter titles I've ever, discussed. I reached out to Emily, by the way. She said she's very flattered that her book is one of, your 3 most formative, and she loves and has read many times your other 2 formative books, by the way. And
Amazing.
and then she actually sent us a question for you. I really love
Mhm, mhm.
bringing questions from past guests. So here's what she sent me. Emily says for Sonia, I have been looking for all the effective strategies to help people let go of culturally constructed aspirational ideals
Mhm.
and instead believe that who they truly are is someone worth being. What have you found to be the most effective ways to help people make this transition, which I feel is our shared job?
Wow, so interesting. If I understand the question correctly, so these culturally constructed aspirations, a lot of these are what we call extrinsic goals, right? In psychology, right? So like it's sort of money, power, beauty, sort of status, fame. So those are the things that and accomplishment, and that we chase, and we think those are the things that like will make us happy. And by the way, I still kind of chase those things too. Like I think we all, even if we know very well that's not the chasing them doesn't make us happy, but it's really like the intrinsic goals that are associated with happiness, and those are really goals having to do with connecting with others, with contributing to society. Right, we talked about this a little bit. Helping others and growing as a person. It's like that. Those are really the things. That the intrinsic goals are associated with happiness. Pursuing extrinsic goals is not associated with happiness, right? So sort of lots of research on that. And so I assume sort of, yeah. So the question is that how you understand the question? Sort
Yeah,
of like,
yeah,
how do we,
exactly. I've been looking at all the
yeah,
effective ways we can help people let go of culture
mhm,
constructed aspirational ideals. Instead, believe
yeah,
who they truly are as someone worth being. Because I think in a lot of her work with in sex, as you said, she's dealing
mhm.
with all the kind of I should be like this or I can't do that. And
Right, the shoulds. So again, it's like,
yeah,
I guess the first step is awareness, right? That there's these, again, sort of beauty and, right, and sort of body image issues are big, in sexuality as a
yeah,
break. So beauty, fame, sort of kind of outward status, success, money, power, popularity. Like those are the things that, like, yeah, pursuing them doesn't make us happy. So the awareness of that, I guess, is the first step, and then really could, focusing on those, again, those three buckets that I mentioned: connection, anything to do with other people, connecting with others; connection, contribution, anything to do with helping others, whether it's our cousin or society as a whole; and then personal growth. It could be learning a new skill, a new language, traveling. So really focusing on those three things are gonna make us happier. And I think it's gonna you're gonna be yeah, your sex's life is gonna improve too. I think when you're sort of happier in yourself, right? Yeah,
it
yeah,
sounds
yeah,
it
yeah,
sounds
yeah,
like it will,
yeah,
and it's something that we can
yeah,
all kind of
yeah,
invest in and work on, no matter where
yeah,
you are in your
yeah,
sexual life. It's a dimension of
yeah,
ourselves that
yeah.
a lot of us struggle with, and if you have kids and that's getting in the way,
Mhm.
that's one thing. If you have no kids and and you're single and you're
Mm,
working on,
mm, mm,
it's
mm,
we live in a day and age where dating's more complicated, meeting
mm,
people's more complicated. Um, I admire that you're out there and you're dating
mm,
because I have
yeah,
friends that are, coming out of a marriage right now
mm,
and they're
mm,
struggling. They're struggling
mhm,
with even
mhm,
dating. Like they're struggling
mhm,
to get out there again. And,
mhm,
the act of
yeah,
dating is
yeah,
difficult and
yeah,
can be very
yeah.
rewarding. But
Well, again, like sharing, and I actually like dating, and partly because 'cause I'm a social person, but it's sort of sharing curiosity and listening, right? Those are the key, with dating or any kind of relationship, right? So if you're doing that, but if you're just trying to impress the other person, then that's not gonna work, right? And so, yeah, I kind of find it as a
any rules you
challenge,
have
yeah.
for
Yeah.
dating these days? Like
What
any, you're dating
yeah.
now. So
Yeah,
what,
yeah. So again, I would say this is really relevant to how to feel loved. Is that most of us, when we meet a new person, we're trying to impress them, and that's very normal, very human. I want you to think that I'm kind and interesting and funny and smart. Um, and so, in my experiences, a lot of the time, and I'm sure this happens with both genders, but since I date men, I can see this. The guy will just talk the entire time. He just talks on and on, right? And I get it, like he's trying to impress me and others, that he's smart and interesting, but it doesn't forge a connection, right? And I have sometimes interrupted them and actually said, "Do you realize that in the last 45 minutes you have not asked me a single question," right?
uh
Um, which, by the way, sometimes I can be kind of brave in saying that. Sometimes it just, like, ends the date and the guy's all huffy, and that's fine. I don't wanna go out with him anyway. But once in a while, like, there's a story that actually I've told this before. One guy, when I said that, he said, "Oh my god." He's like, "I'm so sorry, when I get nervous, I talk too much." And that was beautiful, and then that led us to have a connection, and to let us to have further dates, and so, yeah, so it's, again, feeling loved or feeling connected is sort of curiosity, genuine curiosity, listening and sharing, and when one person is talking nonstop the whole time, that's not happening, right? So that's my advice.
Feeling loved
Yeah.
is genuine curiosity. I think that's a great, great
Yeah.
line as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
you've
a
been very
gift.
it's a
Yeah,
gift. It is a
it's a
gift.
gift.
And you
It's a
have
gift.
given us the gift
Mhm.
of your time. I want to be very respectful of your time. I know you're back to back. I know the book's about to come out. You're in the middle of a lot of things.
Mm.
Just to close us off, I've got 3 or 4 quick, fast money round questions, and then
Okay.
we'll end
Okay.
with a final piece of wisdom. So yeah, hardcover, paperback, audio, or what is your preferred book format?
Paperback, but I often read them on my phone because, like, it's always with me. So, I kinda like those 2 side by side, like a paperback, like actual book. It's not too heavy, and the ebook to read, like, when I'm standing in line, where I'm just sort of waiting around.
You'll
Yeah.
jump into an ebook on
Yeah,
your
yeah.
phone.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Amazing that you're
Yeah.
able to do that. How do
Yeah.
you organize the books on your bookshelf, like at
Oh,
home?
oh, good question. Because my ex-husband does it all alphabetically, but I do it by topic. I actually have a shelf that's just sort of my favorite books, kind of all time. I have a couple of shelves, like, near my balcony, but then I have all my, like, I went to Harvard undergrad. I have all the core classes I took, the books from college, like that those are really fun. I actually just had a friend look at them the other day. She's like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you have these books." I have all my, like, psychology, the happiness books, like the sort of, like, nonfiction, huge shelves of fiction and different kinds of fiction. Yes, it's more like kinda like topic and genre.
I love that.
Yeah.
Do you have a white whale book or any book you've been chasing metaphorically in any sense the longest, a book you've always
And
wanted to read?
Oh, right, and haven't really yeah, yeah, like War and Peace or Brothers Karamazov, I just have not tackled I know Russian, and so I always think, "Oh, I should read them in Russian," but my Russian is not that good, so I really should just give up the idea of reading them in Russian, just reading them in English, so there you go.
Nice. Okay, great.
Yeah,
And by the way,
yeah,
no book guilt, no book shame is one of the underpinning values of this whole
ye
show.
yeah.
Do you have a favorite bookstore, living or dead?
Ooh, good question. I like Book Soup in Los Angeles. There's like little, yeah, there's like little stores here and there that I like. But yeah, unfortunately, I used to go to like the big Barnes and Noble all the time near me because it was like several stories and had like everything, and then it closed down.
You're in
So
Riverside, right?
no, I'm in Santa Monica.
Santa
So
Monica, okay.
yeah, so I used to, yeah, really, I guess it was the big Barnes and Noble because it had like so many sex shows that you can just get lost in. Closed down, unfortunately. Yeah.
But we just interviewed James Daunt a couple years ago on the podcast, the CEO of Barnes& Noble, and they are opening 40 more
I
stores this year.
I
It's
read that. I read
yeah.
that. Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're getting
Yeah.
like 400-person lineups. They're opening them back up in neighborhoods like, that have lost their Barnes& Noble years
Yeah.
ago. So the number one challenge our listeners have is making time to read. Is there anything
Mhm.
you do that helps you make time for reading?
Yeah, yeah. I break it up into I think you have to really be comfortable breaking it up to little chunks. I don't feel like, "Oh, I have to have a 1, 2, 3 hour, period of time." So I read in small chunks. I don't love it. I would love to have bigger chunks to read.
Yeah.
And so, like, I like to actually I read when I have lunch. I read when I have, like, yeah, again, little bits of time here and there. And then audiobooks, of course, I didn't mention it, but I also am a big fan of audiobooks when you're driving or, walking or whatever. So yeah,
Don't be
anything you
afraid to
can do.
microdose.
Exactly, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, like, whatever helps you read. I remember a dentist was asked once, like, "What kind of floss is better? Is it like blah, 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 this kind of floss?" And he's like, "It doesn't matter. Whatever gets you to floss, just do it." And that's the same answer, like, whatever keeps you reading, just do it, don't
Exactly.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that.
great.
Now, a final closing question. Feel free to take a big pause for this one's the last question of the entire show. You
Mhm.
are, to my mind, one of the world's foremost researchers, period. And never mind all your work on happiness and now love and then connection. How to Feel Loved is an incredible book. I'm so glad it's out there. But from everything that you've learned, that you've studied over your entire career, is there one piece of hard fought wisdom or advice you might share? A piece of wisdom for everybody out there listening to the show to close us off.
Mm. I will say give more give more compliments or express more gratitude to each other. Like you mentioned the voice note, today, write a text. It could be a text, right? Because it's only 2 seconds. Write a text or a voice note and say, I'm really grateful that you're in my life. I really love the way you dress. I love your style. I really love your last presentation you gave at work, blah, blah, blah. Like it means so much, right? Like it's a 5 second act that can really
And it's
like
free.
make someone's day. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Professor Sonja
Mm-mm, yes,
Lyubomirsky. It's been a wonderful conversation. I
mm-mm,
really am so
mm,
grateful for
mm,
your incredible
mm,
work, and I'm wishing this new book well. I'll
mm,
feature it in
mm,
my book club as well. For those that don't get it, it's neil.blog.
mm.
And do you want us to point to any websites for you as well?
Absolutely. The easiest one is just howtofeellove.com, right? The name of the book,
The quiz
howtofeellove.com.
is
It has
up
the
there.
quiz. It
Everything's
has
there.
everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming
Yeah.
on Three
Yeah.
Books.
Thank you. Thank you. Yay. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's me, just Neil again, hanging out in my basement, listening back to the wise, witty, and wonderful Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky. By the way, after the conversation was over, she flipped her screen to show me her view because I thought she was in Riverside. She's been an associate professor, assistant professor, professor, and now distinguished professor. And I think like they just gave her the whole faculty. I mean, she's been so prominent. I was like, "Are you in Riverside?" She's, "No, I'm in Santa Monica." And she turned her laptop around and I could see like the sandy beach with like these cresting waves. And I was having the conversation from behind like 3-foot snowbanks in Toronto. I was like, okay, that was a nice, just sort of moment. Um, she's a real pleasure and delight to hang out with. I really love her, like her way of speaking. Like she's like me, I guess. She's like, I don't know if jumpy is the right is the right word. Like she's like, she's excited to talk. And then as a result, the conversation can be like going in a lot of different directions, which is what's so fun and beautiful about great conversations, including the one we're having right now. So many quotes jump out for me from this chat, including most people will report to have at least one relationship in their life they would like to feel more loved in. I had to think about that. It's like I have this superficial reaction to that. I'm like, you know, I feel very loved and blah, blah. But then, you think about it a little deeper. It's like, oh, well, I wish I felt love a little bit more here. And then you realize with the relationship seesaw, that's up to me. Like I can lean in, I can ask questions, I can sort of show a curious mindset. And there's the 5 mindsets, of course, in the book. By the way, for those that can't wait to read it, there is the sharing mindset, the listening to learn mindset, the radical curiosity mindset, the open heart mindset, and the multiplicity mindset, which is very complex and interesting. Kind of remembering that people are dimensional, as Norm McInerney told us back in our chat. Okay, how about this one? We can be loved but not feel loved, which is an important differentiator for her new book and her new work. She says there are 3 buckets that determine happiness. Another quote: genetics, life circumstances, and what we do every day, i.e., what I would call intentional activities. This is kind of where a lot of the stuff I recommend comes in. 2-minute mornings, 2-minute evenings, playing Rose Thorn Bud, getting outside for nature walks, phoning a friend, singing. These are all actual interventions we can do that we know prove help us all be a little bit happier. Now, how about this one? How about this one? She gets into brass tacks a little bit. The most powerful happiness booster is anything social. I'm a pretty social person, but yeah, I can relate and understand this. Even me, I'm like, I got to be more social. I got to read. One of my favorite things to do, honestly, is when I have an NNO. One night a week I have a Neil's night out. One night a week, which was last night. My wife has an LNO. Last night she went from teaching at her school. She met up with a friend. They went to a sauna and cold plunge place. They went out for salads and she came home after bedtime. She gets a night out. For me, I'll often go, see a movie by myself, go for a walk by myself. But what do I do on the walk? I have my AirPods in. I have even a backup pair because I often like drain them. And I literally just call people. I just go through my contact list, flip it in my thumb, and then I hit call. Now, as you know, 2 or 3 out of every 3 or 4 people don't answer the phone, but that means 1 person out of 3 or 4 does, and if you make 12 calls, I find, you get 3 good ones, and then I've got the walk, got some exercise, got some fresh air, and had 3 social connections, so it's my latest thing I'm up to. How about this? If I were to give you one tip to be happier, it would be go and have a 15-minute conversation with someone. That's a repeat of what we were just talking about. The best thing that you could give your kids is a good marriage. Yeah, and it was, I guess, a bit awkward in the beginning of the conversation when I had researched her and found that she was married with kids, and then she said, "Actually, I'm recently separated." And I debated sort of editing that out, but I left it in because I think that shows vulnerability, and as a result, we were able to get into some honesty there, and she was open about kinda dating, and it did not belie the research that she revealed, which is that the number one thing you can do for your kids is the marriage. So, you know, I didn't I didn't wanna be that kinda journalist where I'm, like, poking at a sore spot, but I really admire her courage in talking about it and being comfortable talking about it, which was interesting, and so I do not wish divorce upon anybody. My divorce, of course, was when we had no kids, and we just bought a house, and so, we had less stuff to sort of decouple, and even then, it was very complicated and stuck with me for a really long time, and still I feel the sort of energy of it today. So, Sonja Lyubomirsky, thank you for your courage, your vulnerability, your research, your work, your incredible new book, How to Feel Love, but also all the books and work you've done. So anything you ask her, she's like, "Well, I have a paper about that. I have a paper about that." She has got papers about so many things. If you go to her website, sonjalyubomirsky.com or howtofeellove.com, you start going into her research, and you can spend a lifetime even just reading the amount of research she has done. It's just really amazing. Sonja has given us 3 more books to add to our top 1,000, including number 542, Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes, Taubes. Number 541, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by Dr. John Gottman. And number 540, Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, who was our guest just last year. And so you can go back and listen to Emily. It was nice for us to get a question from Emily for Sonja as well. Thank you so much to all of you for listening.